So we're here today to talk about the critical part that effective integration of communication and collaboration activities has in successfully creating community in both the face-to-face and online environments of a blended course. And I think I'd like to just do a quick review of the definition that June provided in last week's webinar about what a hybrid or blended course actually is. Components of a blended course are taught in both traditional face-to-face classroom as well as virtual environments. And the key to successful blending is to make sure that the components of both environments integrate into one another so that neither the students nor the instructor feel like they're participating in two different courses. Now, for some blended courses, there may be a goal of reducing face-to-face seat time to a point where brick and mortar seat usage only takes up 50% of total seat time. You can also have a blended course where the percentage of online and face-to-face is not exactly 50-50. And so today we want to look at not so much the content components of the blended course, but more those components that enable us to integrate communication and collaboration to establish a sense of community in those environments. Now, the key to a successful blended course is to continually integrate communication and collaboration opportunities into the course because we don't have as much face-to-face time. As instructors and developers of blended courses, we need to look for opportunities to think about not just delivering the lecture, which in a blended environment can be somewhat passive for students in some cases, but also about getting the students to interact more with the instructor, as well as getting the students to interact with one another to support each other in achieving the course learning objectives. So June showed this particular slide last week and tried to sort of refer to it in the integration of the content and the students. I'm dealing more with the communication between the students and their peers and the students and their instructors. Now, when we're going about the process of starting this integration, there are going to be some guiding principles for developing the integration to create this sense of community. And I want to talk about some of these guiding principles, that the way that we as instructional designers like to apply them to the process of developing a blended course. We view that it's the instructor's role to create a sense of community in both environments that will enable the students to interact readily and predictably with the instructor and with one another, so they're not left feeling out in the middle of nowhere, sort of disenfranchised with no connections. If you think about the online part of a blended course where students may be sitting in and listening to an online lecture live, such as we are now, we need to have keys to enable them to feel like they're actually going to have a part of that lecture instead of just sitting out there staring at the screen and wondering when it's going to be over. And hopefully, as we go further into this webinar, I'll be able to demonstrate some good practices that one can use to make sure that the students are engaging with the instructor and the students even when they can't see one another because they are in that virtual environment. In a class community, the students need to be made to feel safe to learn, to ask questions, to support one another, to bring more of themselves in terms of their experiences and ideas and their concerns to the learning process. And we need to think about it, unless you teach an upper-level class or perhaps a graduate course, sometimes there's not a lot of time or the dynamic for real conversation in the classroom, where students are asked or even expected to bring their experience to the table. This is where working in the online environment can sometimes really tease out that depth of conversation and thinking. The students have more time to really consider what it is they want to bring to the table, as opposed to just being on the spot when they're in the live classroom. And sometimes it's just a washing over from the lectern down in the live classroom. In the online environment, a lot of the physical and perceived social barriers are broken down. The line between the instructor and the student and who's actually leading things sometimes becomes a little blurred, a little more readily when we're in the online environment. And many of the techniques for creating community provide hooks into either environment. For instance, if we talk about the discussion board forum, these can be great because we can start the lecture and seed an understanding of the content in the classroom. But then when we move to the online portion of the class, then the discussion board can be used by the students to continue that conversation, to develop further their understanding of the content through peer-to-peer conversation or information sharing. Or you could start the process the other way around. You could have the students do some required independent readings or viewing of brief lectures that will then lead them to a discussion board communication to tease out their general understanding of what they've read. And then this can then seed the direction and the depth of the instructor's next lecture. The instructor can review the conversation thread before coming into the classroom and base a more enriched follow-on lecture based on the things that come out of the discussion board conversation. This is targeting the teaching based on where the students are in their understanding of the concepts, all of which can lead to a richer learning experience. But the trick is to learn to integrate these activities in such a way that they're seamless extensions of the online world into the traditional classroom and back again. So I have an initial question for you if we kind of keep that kind of flow together and think about the whole goal is to start to build a community for the students to have a more enriched learning experience in. I have some questions for you here. Okay, and so in thinking about our objective of building this sense of community in the blended environments, I'd like you to give me a little bit of feedback to the question you see here. And I'm not thinking so much here about the tools that you would use to help structure community, but I'm thinking more about the emotional or intellectual benefits that you would perceive as an instructor in trying to develop a sense of community in your course. And if you just give me a little bit of an idea of where you are on that, we'll share that. I'll give you about a minute to go ahead and type something in for me, please. I feel like I should be playing the Jeopardy theme song here to kind of inspire you to write creatively. Do, 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 do. All right, about 15 seconds, and then I'm going to go ahead and publish some of your responses here. And I know some of the folks that are logged in today are not actively teaching this semester, but you do support those who instruct. So I'd like you to also think about this, gang. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and publish. Okay, so students who feel like they are in a community will feel like they're in a safe environment to do those things we just discussed. You know, being able to ask a question or debate with one another. If they feel like disenfranchised souls, they're not going to offer up very much of themselves in a meaningful way. They need to really feel like they've been nurtured into an environment where they do feel safe to stretch themselves a bit and know that their peers and their instructors are going to be accepting of it. We develop community to really foster that engagement between the peers and build that trust. Okay, so everybody kind of gets that community equals trust, and if we really don't have trust and this feeling of a safe environment, we're not going to get very far with the students trying to expose themselves, particularly in the online environment, through tools like the discussion board or wikis or blogs, because they may not feel like they have the comfort zone to do so. And so we're going to be looking here for the next 15 minutes or so at two different pieces of community building. One is just your basic communication possibilities, and the other more of a tendency to how do we move from simple communication into true collaboration. So another question for you. I want you to think about the strategies or activities that you may use in face-to-face environments to foster community, and then think about what strategies or activities you could use online to foster community. And these could include tools that you might find in an ELMS course space or that exist external to Blackboard. And I'm looking here mostly at tools that foster communication between instructor and student, student and instructor, and students and students. And just give me a couple of ideas here about those strategies or activities that you might use. And activities could include tools, specific tools, if that helps. Nobody has any ideas in this area? How would you try to create an activity, or what strategy might you use to try to get your students to that feeling of comfort or security, particularly in the online component of your course? Here we go. Now they're pouring in. All right, let's take a look and then maybe discuss them just a bit further. I'm going to go ahead and publish now. Okay, so we have sort of a mix mash in the first one here of tools that are communication, and then I would say a couple of them start to move more into collaboration, perhaps wikis. Twitter in the classroom allows dynamic input from students during a lecture, enables them to really talk very, very quickly, perhaps not even specifically being recognized as themselves, but because you don't necessarily have to have your real name associated with a Twitter, you could have a handle. But in starting to have just your tweets sort of looked at and accepted by your classmates in a semi-anonymous fashion, it starts to move you into a sense that, well, maybe it's going to be okay here, and maybe you'll be willing to more and more expose yourselves. Lots of people like the idea of Twitter. That's great for in the classroom. Has anybody tried to have a Twitter feed going while you are perhaps trying to teach in an online environment? If you have, could you raise your hand? Okay, Akila, how have you used it while you've been teaching it online? I've got to go ahead and give you the talk button here.
Oh, I wasn't ready to talk. Oh, well, basically, there's a couple applications. One is called GigaTweet. I might have spelled it wrong there when I typed it in, but if you Google GigaTweet, it allows you to do like a live tweet stream while you can have that going like up on like your projector or whatever while you're having lectures. So you can have a bunch of hashtags. So you can have a tag related to your topic and one related to the course, and you can kind of see what's going on, and people can kind of chime in from there.
All right, so that can be just as really as you can do in the classroom where you've got this back channel going. You could just as easily do that if you've got something going on virtually. That's good to know. I hadn't even really thought about that, so that's really kind of cool. Okay. Somebody mentions Facebook. Facebook always sort of gets a mixed bag response from faculty when I talk to them. Whoever sort of posted the Facebook idea, and I'm not yet looking really for small group projects as a collaboration right now. I'm thinking more communication than collaboration at this point. But um, what's everybody's thought on the use of Facebook as part of the course enterprise? Anybody have thoughts on that they'd like to share? Who offered up Facebook, and what do you think about that? Or what have you been hearing about the use of Facebook in the classroom? Ah, okay, Brad. So are your students actually working within groups in Facebook, sort of interculturally? So why, Brad? why why do you love the fact that faculty were initially uncomfortable? Do you like making your faculty uncomfortable in a support environment, or are you trying to help them sort of stretch themselves just a little bit? Okay. All right. Yeah, I think it is interesting. Facebook, if you look at the literature now, it's still really all over the place as to how effective a teaching tool it might be. But in terms of making sure that the students know that if they'd like to use it as a resource for continuing their conversations outside of the classroom as yet one more resource that might work for them, that's great. Yet I hear from some students that they really like to separate their student world from their social world, and Facebook is still for many perceived to be sort of a social environment. So I guess the only thing we can say with that is we need to tread carefully with the use of Facebook and really kind of take the pulse of the students as the course starts to unfold to make sure they're comfortable. And it is enabling you to develop that safe sense of community that you're seeking, and actually getting them to go and use Facebook to begin with. I like the idea here of coming up with some kind of a get to know you introductory kind of activity with students. One that I heard about recently, and it's not so much a communication, it's more in between communication and collaboration. But if you are actually conducting the class in an environment like Live Classroom, where we have these breakout rooms, a really good way of getting the students to know one another, maybe your first time out there, is to just put a number of them into different breakout rooms, and you give them a problem to solve, and they don't get to come back into the classroom until the group has worked together in their breakout room to solve the problem. It's sort of like gaining access to the island. I've had two different faculty members on campus who have done that, and the students actually kind of like it. They don't let it go on, and it's not a unsolvable problem, but it does get the students working in the environment very quickly and starting to depend on one another just a little bit in this, for many, an environment they may not be particularly useful or used to, and just makes a real effective use, I think, of that breakout room. Potentially because in the future you're going to make use of breakout rooms again where they need to do something that's not quite as whimsical as just trying to get back on the island. But interesting kinds of uses of the technology. Well, I have a few ideas too to share with you. And these do tend to be more toward uh, purely communication activities that are either quite intimate or really one way, but do tend to start to get the students engaged in the course. Things like email and discussion board and synchronous chat. A number of you mentioned all of these. I think no matter what kinds of tools you select to try to get that communication part of establishing a community on board, there are a couple of things we need to make sure we do. We need to make sure that the technique or the tool or the communication device is used frequently, and that it's found and used in a predictable way. In Blackboard, students can get really confused because there's the send email tool, and there's the messages tool, and then external to that, there's course mail, and then there's all manner of ways that the students could try to communicate with you and you with them and they with each other. But in order for them to really get that sense of community going quickly, we need to really focus them in on one or perhaps two, and then be very consistent about its use and in terms of the structure of a learning management environment where they're going to find access to that tool and to the results of that tool. Where's the communication going to go? Where are they going to find it? And then we need to have some sense of redundancy, particularly for students for whom being in an online environment is somewhat of a new experience. You can't get the information to them in too often. You really need to have announcements and emails and follow-up and have devices that enable them to get into that online environment often. And that's one of the reasons sometimes we recommend the use of the messages tool within Blackboard, because the students need to go into the environment in order to retrieve that communication and in order to send communication. And while there may be pushback from some because they don't want to have to do that, a lot of the content that they're supposed to engage with, many of their activities are going to be there. Other resources that you're providing that enable them to do collaboration are all in that environment. So you really want to have as many draws into the environment, and many of those initial draws are going to be your communication tools like announcements or like the messages or email tool. Okay, so we kind of think about communication. Communication is great. It gets us started. It starts the students feeling a little more comfortable in the environment and kind of introduces them to one another and to you. But I'd also like then to talk about the next step when we need to move beyond it, and whether we're in a face-to-face or online environment, we want to think about collaboration. And so as we think about collaboration, I'd like you just to think about 3 activities that you have used or experienced, either in a face-to-face or online learning environment, that is promoted collaborative or team-building opportunities. And you can say wiki again, but are there other resources that you've used, other activities? Don't even nail it down to necessarily a tool, but an activity. And if you can think of one in a face-to-face environment, put it down. We'll try to discuss it and see if there are ways that would also work in an online environment. And I'll give you a minute or two to go ahead and provide us with some ideas here. Don't all rush to enter something now, or I'll have to sing our theme song again. All right, let's take a look at what's come in so far. And then I have some things to share with you, and we can kind of debate the appropriateness of one or the other in either an online or an in-class environment. But let's see what we have here. Okay, peer assessment group discussion. And I'm going to want somebody to sort of follow up and be more specific on what that might be. A scavenger hunt with online access in the class meeting. Now, I've used scavenger hunts as a tool to introduce students to the content, but if somebody would be willing to speak up on that in just a moment, I'd also like to kind of pursue that idea. Google Docs and a team wiki, right? Coming up with a publication or for having them step through a process for actually developing content. Simulations, absolutely. Great tools. They can be done real world in the classroom or online. Whoever submitted the scavenger hunt, would you be willing to provide a little more detail on what you're thinking about there? Ah, okay. So like the icebreaker where you're in the room and you're trying to find out certain things about different people. Yeah. Okay. So how might you do that sort of icebreaker in an online environment? Anybody have any thoughts on that? If you do, raise your hand with the little hand tool below the people list. Okay, well that's what I'm gonna need to think about a bit more in terms of taking that idea of the scavenger hunt about things and people and letting the students in the class um, do that in an online environment, either going into breakout rooms or something like that, so that you get that same kind of feedback that you would get if the students were wandering around a classroom trying to find out information about one another, which I think, June, is different than the kind of scavenger hunt you and I might be thinking about, where you're having students actually run through different parts of the course space in order to familiarize themselves with it. In this case, I think Jill was talking about having a scavenger hunt to learn a little bit more about the other students in the class, finding out pieces of commonality between each other. Um, all right. Well, I have a few ideas to share, and then I have sort of bringing the whole process together, a real world course offering where we sort of start with independent pre-class activities, stroll on through in-class collaborative kinds of things, and then a mix mash of collaboration and individual activities to round out the integration of learning about one particular topic in a course. But first, let's just take a look at some of the collaborative activities I was able to think of. And many of these we might think work best in one environment or the other. But as you look at this list, can you imagine a situation where one of these items would not work in either online or face-to-face? Group discussion. What about group discussion? Where do you think that happens? Both places? Yes? No? One of the reasons we find that the discussion board is so popular in an online environment is that the students, particularly underclassmen, until that sense of community is really well established in a classroom, um, feel a little more confident communicating with their peers in a semi-serious way when they don't have to be right with them. You know, that they are able to break down some of the social barriers and think more precisely about what it is they want to say to a group topic when they are able to write in an online environment rather than when they're sitting in a little circle in a classroom. That starts to change, though, as the dynamic of the class starts to evolve. A lot of times, students who have really started to perceive a strong sense of community in the external classroom will then start to come in and want to know, well, who is saying that? And I'd really like to be able to talk to that person a little bit more. And it draws them into the face-to-face social engagement a little more readily. How many of you have ever brought guest speakers into the course space, either externally or in the live classroom? And if you're in the face-to-face classroom, were they in your classroom physically or virtually? Is guest speaker something that people are trying to integrate into the collaboration and communication component of their course? One of the nice things about having some of the online tools within a course space is that it does make communication from a guest speaker much more affordable, if nothing else, and much more timely. Sometimes being able to have access to subject matter experts is a difficult thing, but if we're able to bring them into the virtual environment, the students are really able to get access to a much wider range of other students, perhaps, or other experts in the field that will really enrich the learning opportunity of a particular class. We see this sometimes happening in college of education classes where experts in the field will be brought into the classroom virtually. Students are sitting in the physical classroom and they're able to see on a screen or whatever their guest speaker. We can do that just as easily or even easier if we're in an online environment. Game playing, you just have to sort of carefully craft some of these activities. But I would say just about anything that you might do in the physical classroom in terms of collaborative activities, you can find a way to translate that into an online activity. It may take a little bit of structuring. Certainly the instructional designers here in Learning Technologies would be happy to help you think that through. You know, what tool or environment would enable you to do some of these things, but we can really move a good deal of this in. Poppy, you indicated a yes to my question. Do you want to share anything more about your use of guest speakers or your experience with guest speakers in the classroom? I thought I saw a check mark there for a little bit, but then it disappeared. So, all right. Well, I'd like to sort of sum up here by taking you on a brief tour of this whole idea of integrating the online and the face-to-face components of a course with techniques that may help foster some of this community building through communication and collaboration activities. And so let me bring up my next slide here as a starter. Okay, so we start in this particular course, and in this course, the unit is on creating presentations. It's a technology course, and the students are learning the technology behind presentation building. And before they ever come to the first class, they have online content that they engage with, and they are required to sort of indicate they've reviewed it and engaged with it. And then another independent piece that enables them to communicate a growing understanding of not presentation tools, but presentation effectiveness, what kinds of things make presentations effective or not. They're required to do a reading and find, and this particular reading is Edward Tufte's PowerPoint is Evil, so obviously it has a very specific bias, and they're required to do a little bit of a literature search and find either a supporting or contrary opinion on the part of PowerPoint or presentation graphic software. And then they're asked to reflect upon those writings and their own experience with good or bad presentation technique in the classes that they have taken. And this is their communication with their instructor, the reflective communication with their instructor that starts to build sort of a background for things that they're going to need to do when they come into the classroom. Then they come to the classroom. And in the classroom, they receive about another 20 minutes of very targeted lecture on specific tools. There's a little bit of a Q&A to follow up on some of the best practices that had been featured in both the online lecture and in the readings they had gone through. And then these students, and I will tell you, this is the first day of class for these students. So the first day of class, they are put into teams, two-person teams, and based upon their understanding of lecture content, they're asked to work on a team project in the class. There is a rubric that they are developing to that is based upon all the readings that they have done. So they have about 2 hours in class to work on this team project. Then they move from this in-class team activity they put their finished product into a publicly available place. That we in this particular class, the students used SlideShare. And then each team goes into a discussion board forum and identifies the rubric components that they were designing to. And these are rubric components that they learned about in that online lecture. And they need to have that up by a certain point in the week. And then each student individually then goes and looks at 2 team projects, not their own, and evaluates the effectiveness of those projects based upon all of the readings, the rubrics, the reflections that they've had from literature in the field. And that sums up the content, the communication strategies, the collaboration strategies that just integrate all components of this particular learning unit and pull together online and in class in a fairly seamless way. And by the end of the first week, the students have started to get a sense of community. They've met at least one of their classmates and have become best pals with them because they've had to very quickly develop a product together. And they've started to explore being able to communicate their own thoughts on a topic understanding that they have their own personal experiences to bring to bear on the topic. And the whole sort of subtext of it is to make them feel more comfortable and empowered to bring their own experiences to the activities that are going on in the classroom. To date, it's been a fairly successful way of blending a learning unit between online and in class with a variety of tools and strategies. Now, the one thing that can get a little dicey in all of this is this idea of team building. So I just want to move towards concluding this session by talking just a moment about some team building strategies that enable us to make sure that our collaboration opportunities, our communication opportunities are a bit more successful. And those of you who have ever tried to get your students into teams, these will be fairly recognizable. The idea of making sure you've created effective group sizes. Really anything more than 7, and in my opinion, anything more than 5 is going to be pretty tough for a group to effectively engage, have jobs to do, work, not fall on top of one another. And the idea of the low stakes team building exercise. In this particular course, this 2-person exercise was created as a building block for activities that will occur later in the semester that will be larger group activities. So enabling them to start to work together in smaller groups and then broadening the number of people who will be in a group in order to do future kinds of activities is also a very good idea. And having a rubric for those groups so that they know how they're going to, what the group is trying to do and potentially have something to evaluate one another with. Also very good strategies for successful team building. And that team building is sort of at the end of the spectrum of successfully creating community, where the students feel like they can go off as independent units of the class and produce something that they can then contribute back into the greater whole of the course. That's really successful team building. And I just looked at this picture here and realized, this is a picture of my children, or a couple of them in that little picture there. I was wondering where that came from. Not look. And so just to conclude, there are a number of resources out there on effective communication in hybrid and blended courses. I offer up some of these links here. If anybody would like to get a broader listing of them, we do have here in the Learning Technologies group a little workshop space that deals with all the different components of designing a blended course that we support. And we'd be happy to put anybody who has an interest in having access to the materials like this, we'd be happy to put you into that space so that you can peruse some materials that have actually been vetted by our staff. So in the 5 minutes or so that we have left, I'd like to hear what kinds of activities or challenges or strategies you all are currently developing as you start to move into a blended environment, or as you have been moving into a blended teaching and learning environment. Does anybody wish to share? You can raise your hand. I'd be happy to chat with you. Jennifer, please share with us. You just need to hold down the talk button.
Okay.
You just need to hold down the talk button.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I'm teaching currently a reading methods course in the College of Education, and it's a blended course. And for me, I think the most difficult thing is integrating and making those activities seem seamless to the students, because I sort of constructed the course so that the online component almost feels like separate learning units. And sometimes the topics integrate, and I try to make sure in my face-to-face course I'm actually tapping into what they've said online through the threads and discussions on the different forums. But sometimes still there's so much different content that I don't have time to get to in my face-to-face sessions that I sometimes feel like it's a bit disjointed. So I think that's my major issue I'm trying to work with this semester.
And that is the big issue. That is the toughest part, whether it's, getting that integration of the communication, collaboration aspects, or whether it's getting the integration with the content, or all of it is that seamless cycle. And it is an iterative process, I can tell you that. You may start down the path this semester and find things that are working, and then you may layer on the next semester with some additional strategies. There's no one best way to do it, because everybody's content, course size, position of the students in ranking, like are they seniors or are they sophomores, a number of things will affect some of the decisions that you're going to make. What tools are available, what tools do you feel comfortable with. This is where our team of instructional designers love to kind of sit down and look at what your learning objectives are. And you're in the College of Education, you're all over the idea of learning objectives, but we try to look at them and then look at what you're trying to do. Do we have some solutions that are technology based, or if they don't require technology, then obviously some of them are going to need to happen in the face-to-face. But we'd be happy to sit with you and just kind of think through some things. We might be aware of somebody else who is trying to do something similar to what you're doing, who has had some success, and we can share those success stories with you. Or on the other hand, somebody who's tried to do something and it didn't work out, and we can tell you, well, it didn't work in this case and why. But that's sort of what we really like to do. It's all well and good to support ELMS and say click here, click here, click here, but the more satisfying piece is really looking at courses and trying to help you with the strategies that will enable you and the students to be successful in this sort of new environment. So if you think we can be of help to you, please just give us a call, and we'd be happy to come in and talk with you and try to work through some of the things that you're thinking about. Any other sharing here from anyone? Anybody else have any specific kinds of things they're trying to work through? Well, I hope we've touched on a few of the strategies and tools that may help you start thinking about how to create a sense of community in a course where you're going to be in two different environments as the course evolves. And if you have additional things that you do that we haven't sort of touched on here, we'd love to hear from you so that we can sort of build our own knowledge of how people are addressing this moving into a blended environment out in the field. We'd like to be able to share that with you. So I thank you for your time today. I'll hang out here until folks have left the room. And next week we will have June. We'll be talking about Camtasia and making Camtasia videos more accessible through the use of captioning. And in 2 weeks, I'll actually be back online talking about how to help your students succeed in an online or blended environment, some tips and tricks and best practices. So I hope we'll see you as the month wears on. And have a good week.